Welcome back to the shop. This is going to be my next project build. I'll have the professional plans on my website and the full tutorial on my channel once it's finished. But I ended up doing something a little bit different here that I thought would be enough for a standalone video because it applies to more than just building a cabinet. You could also apply this same method to building a frame. And I'll get into that as I talk a little bit about the Veneer species, which happens to be Hawaiian monkey pod, and how I came up with this idea. But before that, I want to just kind of say again why I like to veneer cabinets as opposed to just building the cabinet out of a specific wood species. So for instance, let's say that this is a walnut cabinet, because I'm not even sure if you can get Hawaiian monkey pod plywood. But often when I build walnut cabinets that are veneered, I'll get the question, why not just use veneer, or why not just use walnut plywood? And there's two really big reasons for that. Number one is, if you're gonna build this out of walnut plywood, you'd have to get a perfect miter along this seam, which is doable with a track saw, but it's not the easiest thing to do. And I try to gear this channel towards the sort of basic woodworking, the small shop basic woodworking group that wants to make furniture for their own home. So that's a pretty hard joint to make, and if you don't get a perfect joint, that's an obvious screw up that's just going to stick out like a sore thumb. So that's one reason. Another reason is you're going to have to hide the plywood end or edge, right? You don't want that to be seen. And the way that's generally done is either by maybe an iron-on edge banding. For the most part, I make a molding and then I apply it to the front of the cabinet. That covers the end grain. Now, if I were to build this out of plywood, and let's say I get that perfect seam and everything, or I get that perfect miter joint, I'm still gonna have a seam on the side of the cabinet, and I don't like the way that looks. So by veneering the cabinet and building it out of plywood first, you can hide that by then covering or edge banding the front of the cabinet with your molding, and now the veneer goes on next and that covers that seam. So that's really one of the big reasons. I think working with veneer opens up all types of design possibility because you don't have to think about expansion and contraction the way you do when you're working with solid wood. Last week, I posted kind of an art video, but I showed a desk that I made about 25 years ago. It's made of solid babinga, and that is made with dovetails. And if you looked at that desk, you'll realize that all the grain is going the same way, so that cabinet can expand and contract together. So if I were to try to build this out of solid wood, I'd either have to use dovetails or maybe I could use dominoes, but it's just a tremendous amount of more work. If I use dominoes, I'd have a big end grain seam here. Dovetails look good. You could use dominoes and try to make that miter joint, but again, it's just a lot more difficult. And I'm trying to make pieces of furniture that I think are approachable to the somewhat beginner intermediate woodwork. Now let's go ahead and take a look at this Hawaiian monkey pod, which is right here. And I'll show you how I came up with the solution of attaching the veneer with a cross grain pattern. These are cornhole bean bags, and they're really handy to have around for weighting down the veneer when you take it out of the box. The veneer is going to be shipped to you in a box like this, and I put this saran wrap around it because I've already looked at the veneer. And this is where these bean bags come in really handy because they're not going to scratch the veneer, and you can see how it weights it down. Usually these sheets are 4x8, or at least that's what I've mostly worked with. This looks like it's 4x10, but it works the same exact way. I'll just have a little bit more than I actually need. But we can go ahead and put a little water on this grain, see what it looks like, because that'll bring me to the next part of this project, which is figuring out what I'm going to use for the trim that will cover the edge of the plywood. I have a nice piece of natural mahogany here, which originally I thought might be a good match, but now I'm thinking it's not. But we might go ahead and just run this through the planer to see what that looks like and put a little water on both of them. If it doesn't look right, then there is another option, which I think might actually look better. I've got a damp rag to give you a good idea of what this veneer will look like once it gets a little finish on it. I really like these dark ribbons, but what I'm realizing is this mahogany is just going to be way too light. So I'm going to do something else, which is going to be a little more work, but I think it'll be worth it. This whole process is kind of what I thought I was going to do in the beginning when I started to think about this project, simply because I don't have any monkey pod boards hanging around the shop and I really don't know where to get them. So it really came down to finding a good match with the veneer to trim out the front of the cabinet. Since I don't really have a good match, the idea of laminating the veneer to the mahogany is a good solution. The reason why I don't want to laminate the veneer to, say, 1/2-inch plywood is because I don't want that open end grain on the inside of the cabinet, because the inside of the cabinet is going to get painted white. MDF would be an alternative. I kind of like the mahogany better since it's a little bit more dense, so it should hold up to more. Another kind of nice bonus about adding the veneer with the grain running cross grain instead of long grain is I'm going to end up with a nice sunburst effect on the outside of the cabinet. I think that's going to look pretty cool. Now, as far as the back of the cabinet, I'm not going to go through the whole laminating process. I'll just use mahogany to trim out the back of the cabinet. I still like the back of the cabinet to look nice and finished, and so that will look good. It's basically going to be clear finish on the mahogany, and then it'll be painted white on the back, and it should look nice and clean. The other part of this cabinet is just a base, but the base has really nothing to do with the build. It's a separate part. It's just a little foot that the cabinet will sit on. So basically, the next steps on this project will be to veneer laminate the veneer onto the trim. This trim will get ripped in half, so each one of these pieces will give me 2 pieces of molding. I made a little extra because we all make mistakes, and I'd rather have an extra piece of molding than have to go through this whole process again. So I'll go ahead and trim this out, mitering it on the corners, and trim out the back, and then I'll start the veneer process, first starting with the sides and then last the top. So this build project should be on the channel by this time next week. I thought I'd make a separate video just to show you some of the design ideas and decisions that you kind of make when you're designing and building something. And I thought that this would be kind of a neat thing to show you, just in case you wanted to make a fancy frame. This is another way you could do it. You could make long pieces of molding. I'm sure you can imagine a picture frame with that sunburst effect looking pretty cool. In fact, maybe that's something I'll do sometime in the near future. So hope you enjoyed this episode. If you're looking for a good woodworking project that will inspire you to get out in the shop, I hope that you'll check out all of my woodworking plans right here. They all have step-by-step video tutorials right here on YouTube designed to help guide you through the project and help you make furniture for your home. As always, thanks for tuning in, and I'll see you next time. If you're thinking about trying a veneer project, I've got a bunch on my channel. And here's a look at just a couple. The first one is a walnut server, I would say that this is a little bit more of a complicated or an advanced project, but it's broken down. You can take your time and do it. You'll have no problem. Every project is just like a pile of dirt, one shovel at a time. Just stick with it. The next project I would consider a beginner project because it's just a box. This is a waste paper basket, and in this video I go over peel and stick veneer, which is just like applying a sticker, and the contact cement way of applying veneer. So if you watch that video, it's like a crash course in just how to veneer using a few different methods. This next one is a pretty simple project. It's, again, just a box with some legs on it. It's a desk. I think it's got some cool lines. I really like the look of it. I have it in my house now with a vintage walnut chair next to it. And I think the walnut and veneer go pretty well. I'll have to get a picture of that, maybe up on my Instagram. And here's one more. This is a walnut desk. This is a very modern piece. And this one's pretty complicated because the drawer fronts are continuous grain all the way through. So the drawer fronts are solid, but the rest of the cabinet is made with plywood and then simply veneered. This is just a look at a few of the projects that are on my site, but I think I have at least 10 veneer projects, and they're all step-by-step video tutorials. I'll have links to all the projects down in the description below. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you next time.